Can the Los Angeles Rams beat the Detroit Lions, who are coming into town this week for their Week 7 contest, by 2 or 3 scores? Listen to our prediction for that contest on this episode of the Locked On Rams podcast.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rams Nation, how's it going? As always, it is your boy, your host, Sosa Kremenjas. I'm a fantasy analyst at PFF and your host here at the Locked On Rams podcast, your number one daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Before we dive into this one, I just wanted to thank you guys, as always, for making us your first daily listen here at the Locked On Rams pod. There's a lot for us to talk about in this game. The Rams, the Lions, getting ready for what kind of feels like a divisional rival game almost, with how many connections there are between these two teams. Before we dive into that, I wanted to give you guys a quick transactional update. The Rams have made a few moves, I guess you could say, to their 53-man / practice squad roster. I believe I mentioned it on yesterday's episode. They placed tight end Johnny Munt and running back Jake Funk on injured reserve for the season. Those guys are both going to be done playing football for this season at least. You talk about a torn ACL for Munt, and I think it was a torn hamstring for Funk, which is just completely unfortunate. I mean, these guys are both guys that have suffered season-ending injuries in the past, especially Funk, who has multiple ACL tears. So terrible news for them, but obviously the Rams did sign Buddy Howell, like we mentioned, and Dante Dion to their 53-man roster, which opened up 2 spots on their practice squad, and they have now filled those as well. They signed a defensive back by the name Grant Haley and a tight end by the name Jared Pinkney, and both of these guys are now going to join the team on the practice squad, try to get caught up here with the playbook and everything else that they're going to be way behind in terms of the offense. And so we'll see how quickly they can get caught up. The Rams don't need to rely on these guys. They are on the practice squad. They're not on the 53-man roster, but they added 2 guys at, I guess you could say, positions of need. You lose a tight end, you add a tight end. You lose a running back and then replace him with a cornerback. But you also lost Darius Williams at cornerback, so now you replace sort of that hole there with another guy in Grant Haley, another cornerback. So makes sense. It's sort of a one-for-one type of deal here with the Rams. Don't really know how much these guys are going to contribute this season, if at all. Maybe at some point they get up to the 53-man roster. But as it stands right now, they're settled. Everything looks good for the Rams. They're relatively healthy as you could possibly be heading into week 7 of a season. And that is definitely a important thing when you go against a team like the Detroit Lions, not because the Lions are a Super Bowl contending roster that you need full power to go against, but this is an important game. The Rams are sitting at 5-1. They're going back home to SoFi Stadium. They're going to see some old friends here. Quarterback Jared Goff now in Detroit, defensive tackle Michael Brockers, a former cornerbacks coach in Aubrey Pleasant, a guy that worked in their front office in Brad Holmes. There's a lot of connections here. Even someone like wide receiver Kadero Hodge, who is now in the Lions. There are so many former Rams there, and that makes sense. Like we just mentioned, Holmes is now their general manager, the guy who's basically going to put together the talent and the roster, and he's going to go get guys that he's familiar with, people that he drafted or that he lobbied for with the Rams, or people that he signed as undrafted free agents. So it's probably why there's a lot of connections there, but this is an important game for the Rams. It's another intra-conference matchup here against the Lions. No, it's not going to be a barometer for how good the Rams are this season. The Lions might be the worst team in football, but you want to stack up some of these wins and look like you're starting to build some of that optimism and consistency moving forward. We talk about this schedule, and the Rams got through their first part of the schedule, which is arguably the hardest of their entire season. Teams like Tampa Bay, Arizona, Seattle, all these good teams, Indianapolis, Chicago. That's a lot of playoff teams from last year. Now they're in that second part of their schedule, which is probably the easiest of their season. They obviously beat the New York Giants already. Now they go against the Detroit Lions, who they should beat. Houston Texans next week. Tennessee Titans after that. Titans, yes, they were a playoff team last year, so they're maybe going to be a little bit tougher, or should be at least. But the other teams, the Rams should absolutely beat these teams up. And that's why I'm looking at this game. You know, there's some matchups to watch, of course. How's Jared Goff going to play in this game? How's Matthew Stafford going to play against a team that he played 12 years for? Is there going to be any nerves there? Are the Rams going to start slow on offense again because maybe Stafford's trying to get himself settled down in what's going to be an emotional game? Let's just be real about it. Everyone's going to play it down. Sean McVay already has. Jared Goff already has. Matthew Stafford, I'm sure, already has too. But this is an important game for everyone here. I mean, there's a lot of ties here. Everybody wants to win and have sort of those bragging rights moving forward. Stafford, of course, wants to beat the team that he played so long for and put on a good show. McVay, there's that turmoil between his relationship with Jared Goff. Was it souring at the end? Did they like each other? I don't know. I wasn't in the building. I can't say, but there's certainly going to be reasons for everyone to want to win this game personally above just wanting to win a football game, because that's what you should want to do every time you play. So going to be a good matchup. I think the Rams are significantly more talented. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Clearly, they are a team that a lot of us expect to go very deep into the playoffs, whereas the Lions, they're not going to say that they're fighting for the first overall pick right now, but let's just call it what it is. I mean, they should have a lot more interest in tanking right now than trying to win football games. Yeah, absolutely. Dan Campbell is not going to go about it like that. He's a head coach. He's being paid to win football games. Everyone on that roster wants to keep a job, so they're going to try to win football games. But this is one of the least talented rosters in football. And that's why going into this prediction, I think the Rams are going to absolutely demolish the Lions. I think they're just significantly more talented in terms of the roster, up to down, first player to the 53rd player. But on top of that, there's just that extra itch and motivation right now. And I just don't think the Rams are going to want to lose this game. We talked about it, I think, after last week's game as well. Sean McVay is 41-0 when leading at halftime. The record is set by Bill Belichick, 42-0. That's the current record. Consecutive wins, I should say. So if Sean McVay and the Rams go about this game properly, they should be leading at halftime, of course. We're talking about the Lions here. This is not exactly the best team in football. If that's the case, well, then Sean McVay is going to have a chance to improve his record to 42-0 and tie the record. And, he's going to always say this doesn't matter. Nobody really cares, but it matters. Let's just be honest. It is what it is. This is an important record. It's going to be cool to see Sean McVay try to reach it. And if he can this week, if he can crush it next week against the Houston Texans, the Rams are set up perfectly to do so. We're not going to dive into that game just yet. In the next segment, we're going to dive into the crossover portion of this Thursday episode like we always do on these podcasts here. I'm joined by Locked On Lions host Matt Dery, so we're going to cut to that in just a second. Get to know everything about this matchup, how the Lions are playing, how some of our former friends, Michael Brockers, Jared Goff, etc., are doing over there, and ultimately what there is in this game for the Lions, for the Rams, our predictions, and how this game is going to go for both sides. Before we get to there, you guys can always follow us on Twitter at QBsMEP, at Locked On Rams, and on YouTube at Locked On Rams. And you guys have heard me talk about Rock Auto many times. If you're a person who drives a vehicle, you've probably had something go wrong on your vehicle, maybe need to be replaced. You go to your mechanic, you need 7 to 10 business days to get it fixed, cost an outrageous amount. You don't have to do that old song and dance anymore. All you have to do, just go check out rockauto.com. They are a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. Regardless of if you're a professional or you just like to fix things yourself, you should go check them out. They have the best prices available. Not only that, but they've got pretty much every make and model. So if your car is brand new or 25 years old, they're probably going to have you covered. Amazing selections, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us section so they know that we sent you. Locked On Rams and Locked On Lions listeners, welcome to the second segment now. We're going to dive into this crossover portion of this episode. And of course, this is a big game. So I am joined by Locked On Lions host Matt Dery, and we're going to break down everything about this game. Obviously, it's an important one between two teams that have a little bit of familiarity now. There's a lot of back and forths here. Matthew Stafford now with the Rams, Jared Goff, Michael Brockers with the Lions, as well as some of the front office and coaching members. You look at guys like Aubrey Pleasant and Brad Holmes. So, Matt, I guess that's where we'll begin. I want to hear how some of our old friends are doing over in Detroit right now. I know probably not the most successful season, maybe not too enjoyable for Lions fans, but in general, I feel like they've been in a lot more closer games than even I expected so far.
Yeah, Sosa, you ask how are they doing? The answer is not good when you're off to an 0-6 start, and certainly not what they expected. Look, nobody expected this team to be a playoff contender. Only the diehard slappies would think, oh, maybe we can go 8-8 or 7-9 in the first year of a rebuild. No way. I said 4 wins, but I thought they'd have one by now. But 0-6, it's not been good. Last Sunday was ugly against Cincinnati. They were dominated from start to finish. Not a great effort, which has been unusual. Like you said, Dan Campbell's teams through the first 5 weeks really scrapped and played hard. Should have beaten the Ravens, should have beaten the Vikings, to be quite honest. But so far, it's been a struggle. And, Jared Goff certainly will be in the spotlight this Sunday. He has got to play better football. So you watched him for years with the Rams. He has not played well. 6 fumbles in 6 weeks. He's saying all the right things about, hey, when I get back there, it's going to be fun. I'm going to see a lot of friends and coaches. He's taken the high road about Sean McVay, but he hasn't played good football, and he doesn't have a lot of weapons to throw to, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think even when you look at Dan Campbell kind of putting him out on blast, it felt like with that press conference a few days ago. I guess we'll keep it there with Jared Goff. Now, when you look at this quarterback situation, obviously he's not played that great, but he's not exactly in the best situation, right? Either you're talking about a lot of receivers that the Lions didn't go into the season thinking we're going to be the 1 and 2 and 3 options there. So when you look at, the rest of this season and even going into next season after this rebuild, after this first year, do you think there's any chance that they can go into next season with Jared Goff as that quarterback again? Or do you think this might be a one and done type of scenario, or even an addition to the room where he can kind of, battle it out going into next year as that starting quarterback?
Well, first off, I don't necessarily think that Campbell put Goff on blast. He said before that the entire offense was to blame, not just the quarterback, but then said, but we need Jared to step up. I like that he said that. I don't think necessarily it was as demeaning as some national folks thought it was on Goff. But let's be honest here. He's not played well. Last week, 7-0 game, second quarter, Lions moving a little bit, 3rd and 4 at about the 45 of the Bengals. And he's got TJ Hawkinson coming out of the backfield in a different formation that confused Cincinnati. Tight end lined up next to him. And he goes with a wheel route. And Hawkinson, a good throw, and it's a touchdown, Sosa. And he missed him. Just overshot him. Those are the kind of bad throws that he's making that are proving to be very, very costly in games like this. So he has got to be better on throws that, unfortunately, his counterpart this week, Matthew Stafford, made, or an Aaron Rodgers would make. You look at the passer rating; he's near the bottom. So he has to do better. Do I think he's going to be here next year the way he's playing right now? No, but they don't have a quarterback, a young quarterback to groom. They didn't draft one. This year's draft is very bad when it comes to quarterbacks. So I don't know. I mean, it would be a lot of money to have to eat after this year, but I can tell you one thing. In 2023, there's no way he's here.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the situation that they went into this rebuild thinking, right? Is kind of get that bridge guy, maybe give him a shot and see how it works out in the time being. So I want to flip to the other side of the ball. This defense, I feel like they're playing a little bit better than most people expected. Maybe not this past week, like you mentioned, the Bengals game, probably a forgettable one. But you look at the Ravens game, the Vikings game, I feel like they were a lot better than a lot of people give them credit for. So when you look at this side of the ball and for the Rams offense specifically, is there any players that you kind of want to highlight that we should know about, maybe thinking about some matchups to watch in this contest?
I don't think that the Lions have anybody that's a standout on defense that you go, man, he's been really great. But you're right. The scheme with Aaron Glenn has been better. They've played better than expected. Again, this past Sunday, they just ran out of gas because the offense couldn't stay on the field. But they did battle against the Ravens. They held Lamar in check. Kirk Cousins didn't really do anything until the very end of the game against the Vikings. Again, held them to 19 points. So they've been better than what they were a year ago, which was the NFL's worst defense. I like what Charles Harris has done coming off the edge. He's been a pleasant surprise. Derek Barnes, the rookie middle linebacker, is starting to play better. Tracy Walker, the strong safety, has been okay. I think the scheme is better. They're not playing as much man as they did in the past under Matt Patricia, so that's a good sign. But they're also due to get lit up because they're just banged up and not that good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this could be the week, right? You're looking at a Rams offense that's pretty explosive, got a lot of different weapons there on that side of the ball. But this may be a little bit early to ask, but I got to kind of ask just to see how, the Lions media and Lions Nation is kind of feeling about this one. In terms of Dan Campbell, the early returns, how do they seem? Obviously, it's only 6 games in, but I think, from an outsider's perspective, it feels like he's done a really good job at putting his imprint on this team. In terms of your eyes and your point of view, what's it kind of been like for him throughout these first 6 games?
It's still a work in progress. I still would give it an incomplete. I don't know if he can coach or not. I like the culture that he's created. The players seem to like to play for him. There's been a lot of distractions. There's been a lot of injuries. Frank Ragnow, best offensive player and Pro Bowl center, out for the year. Romeo Okwara, best pass rusher, out for the year. Probably their best defender. Jamie Collins, they had to cut because as a veteran player, he just wasn't fitting. They've had a lot of injuries. So I think Dan Campbell has kept it together to where, like you said earlier, the effort has been there. But, of course, after the Vikings loss, he cried at the press conference and got emotional. That got a lot of national attention. I like Dan Campbell. I like what he's doing. But again, they haven't been in enough games where you're saying this decision hurt them, that decision helped them. There have been some close games. There's been some decisions that you question. But, he went for 2 against the Vikings a couple weeks ago, and Goff hit Kaderil Hodge for the go-ahead score. And it was like, wow, that's ballsy, and it was great. But then they came down, rushed 3 on 2 of the 3 plays. Cousins had all day to throw. And then they lose because the Vikings moved down the field and kicked a field goal. So I just don't think they have a lot of talent. Dan Campbell is on a 6-year deal. He's not going anywhere. The Ford family is notorious for keeping coaches longer than usual. So I think for now he's fine. They just got to get that first win, but I don't see it coming this week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see when it does ultimately come. And I think, from this side of the spectrum here, it's going to be fun to see how that team is sort of rebuilt. You talked about, there's not huge expectations for the team this year. Let's just be honest. Nobody expected them really to be a playoff contender or a playoff team. But Brad Holmes did a great job with the Rams, doing a lot in terms of the draft picks. And of course, the Rams have not had a lot of first round picks or early round picks. So I do think that the Lions are in pretty good hands there. In just a second here, we're going to flip the tables. Matt's going to put me on the spotlight and kind of just dive into some questions here about the Rams and maybe some old friends in terms of guys like Matthew Stafford. Of course, you guys dive into the Locked On Rams and Locked On Lions podcast throughout the rest of this week. We're going to continue to break down this game. And then, of course, going into next week, recap what happens in this contest. As you guys, Rams Nation, have heard me talk about many times, I'm an avid bettor when it comes to the NFL. You guys can join in on the action. As always, BetOnline is #1 spot for all the pro and college football action this season. You can get all the latest updated odds, props, and contests, including the $500,000 NFL Mega Contest and the $200,000 Survivor Contest, both open now at BetOnline. You can go ahead to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, from football to basketball to boxing, all the way to horse racing. They're going to have you covered for everything happening in the 2021 season. So make sure to take advantage of all the great offers available right now at betonline.ag.
I'm Matt Dery, Locked On Lions. Sosa Kremenjas from Locked On Rams, the Thursday crossover, a game that many people have been waiting in Detroit a long time for, the Matthew Stafford return, not necessarily to Detroit, but just returning to the field, but this time as an opponent facing the Lions. And Sosa, there's been so much made of Stafford. There are some Lions fans that are going to be glued to this game and actually kind of rooting for Matthew to do well because he was pretty well liked in Detroit, off to a 5-1 start. What kind of a letter grade would you give Matthew Stafford to start this season so far?
Yeah, I think it's kind of been everything you could expect as of right now in terms of the early returns. Of course, they're only 6 weeks in. For me right now, I think it would be somewhere in the A- range. There's always more to be had. And I think, especially in the last few games, there's been that early start that's just been sort of slow for the Rams. I don't really know why, what we could chalk that up to. The first quarter has sort of been rough, not just from Stafford, but in terms of the entire offense. And I still feel like you always see that lack of chemistry come up every now and again, which it's not necessarily Stafford's fault, right? They didn't play in the preseason together. None of these guys got reps together. So they're kind of just learning on the go. So there's, some things they still got to iron out there. And you see some of those passes every now and again come up where it's like, man, you should not have thrown that. I don't know where you were trying to fit that into. There was no window whatsoever. You saw it against the Giants. Probably should have threw 1, if not 2 interceptions early in that contest. But, for the most part, I don't mean to rag on the guy. The guy's been amazing for the Rams. Everything that we thought he was going to be for this team, he's been, and then some. I mean, you're talking about accurate, a guy that can move in the pocket, very good footwork, knows where the pressure is, can kind of feel it from the backside. And even when he doesn't have his eyes down, he's not looking at the pass rush. And he loves to push the ball downfield. I think everyone that's a Lions fan kind of knows that. And that's a huge welcomed addition for the Rams, I think, especially going from Jared Goff, who, is kind of like that captain check down style of player where you're not going to get many explosive plays. It's the complete opposite right now for the Rams. I think you really can't ask for much more out of Stafford. Still ironing out some of those details, the chemistry, trying to learn the offense, of course. But through 6 games, I feel like it's been a really, really good transition right now to a new quarterback.
Are you surprised that Goff has been this bad in Detroit, or is this what you expected him to be?
I was probably a little bit more of a skeptic in terms of Jared Goff, so I would say I'm not very surprised, especially over the last 2 years. It's been consistent regression. For those that maybe think of Jared Goff as the 2018 version, you could definitely say they might be surprised because at that point, he was one of the better quarterbacks in football. But I feel like, 2019, 2020, it's been consistent regression to the point where I think you could even make the case, especially going back to the end of last year, that maybe John Wolford, his backup, might have been the better player at that point in time in that situation. I think he could have made that argument there. And I was one of those people that thought Wolford probably should have started moving forward into the playoffs. So I'm not really surprised. This is a guy who's been very turnover prone over the course of his career. I don't know what it is with the fumbles. The pocket presence just is not there. I mean, he lets go of the football so often. So it's not exactly a surprise to me, especially when you look at some of the surrounding pieces, not exactly the most talented roster. He was going to be kind of tossed into the fire there, which is, unfortunate. It's not going to help his situation, but I'm not surprised really at all.
Tell me about Stafford's connection with Cooper Kupp. Those two are putting up immense numbers together, and it just seems like if you're the Lions defense, this is a guy that could really light them up on Sunday, number 10, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, he hasn't been stopped yet. He looks like he's on an absolute tear. There was a cool stat from JB Long who dropped it a few days ago. He said that I believe Cooper Kupp was the second receiver in NFL history, only to Randy Moss, to get over 600 receiving yards and I think 7 receiving touchdowns throughout the first 6 weeks of a season. So, I mean, anytime you're in comparison with a guy like Randy Moss, you're probably doing something pretty good, I'd say. And of course, it feels like he and Stafford just have this connection where I'm not really sure how it developed so quickly, especially when you look at Stafford and a guy like Robert Woods. They still have this clear lack of chemistry. So it's kind of weird to see how quickly he and Kupp have developed. But I mean, in terms of these two players, they look like they're pretty much unstoppable right now. Matthew Stafford is consistently looking Kupp's way, whether it's 3rd and 7 or in the red zone in those most important areas. And Kupp has always been a guy that's been very, very good at separating and setting up his route. So he's always been a guy that's a clear separator at that receiver position. And it's just been a really, really good marriage so far. I think at some point they might have to slow down on the targets a little bit to try and kind of conserve this guy because it is a long season. But as of right now, I just don't know how you can stop him. I mean, he's been one of the best, if not top 2, top 3 receivers in football.
What about the Lions offensively against the Rams on defense? I know LA has not been as good against the run this year as they've been in the past. Look, we know about Aaron Donald and how great he is, but is that something where the Lions figure we got to keep Stafford and company off the field? We don't want Goff to be too amped up for this game and put him in different positions, difficult positions. So maybe it's the Jamaal Williams and DeAndre Swift show on the ground. How have the Rams been defensively guarding the run?
Yeah, it's been a work in progress, like you mentioned. It's not exactly the best stout run defense, but there is, flashes where they kind of step up and look like one of those defenses that has maybe that potential at some point in time. I think in this game, they might be a little bit more open to being stacking the box a little bit there on the defensive side of the ball, maybe trying to play the run a little bit more because Jared Goff is somebody they're obviously very familiar with, and they don't necessarily have to worry about that deep ball like against some of the other quarterbacks that they've played in recent weeks. You look at guys like Kyler Murray, Tom Brady. I mean, those guys are going to push the ball downfield. So maybe less of a concern in terms of the passing or aerial attack this week. But I definitely think, if the Lions want to try to attack this defense in any manner, it's definitely going to make a lot of sense to try and ground and pound, like you mentioned, keep Stafford in that offense on the sidelines, try and rip off some 4, 5, 7-yard chunks on the ground. Even a guy like TJ Hawkinson, I think would make a lot of sense to try and implement in this game plan because the Rams against tight ends been only subpar. There's kind of some of those holes in the middle of the defense there in the zone coverage. So those are probably the two most susceptible areas I'd say for this defense. But in general, they've done a pretty good job, I think, especially in those red zone areas, the most important areas, that kind of just clenching down and not really allowing teams to score a lot of touchdowns. So in the money areas, they've been solid, but I do think there is definitely some leaky areas there against the run.
Sosa Kremenjas from Locked On Rams, Matt Dery, Locked On Lions. Tell me about Sean McVay this week. Are we going to see him go for the jugular here and really want to blow this thing out, really stick it to Goff? Are we talking Johnny Hecker? And I know Hecker's done it a lot of times. Am I seeing Johnny Hecker this week throwing the rock around on a fake punt? I mean, is this kind of a McVay revenge game where he's like, hey, I got rid of Goff and watch this. We're going to put up a 40-50 spot on them. Do you think that's the way Sean McVay's thinking or no?
I don't know if it is necessarily. I hope it is, because at the end of the day, this is a business and there's no harsh feelings here. You just kind of got to win, right? But at the same time, it feels like there's something extra here. You talk about this relationship between Sean McVay and Jared Goff souring over the course of their career there. And then Sean McVay going out in a press conference and saying, I could have handled it better, maybe been a little bit more clear. And those have been some of the complaints, I would say, from fans, is like he's very coach speak type of player or coach there. But at the same time, I'm just looking at this game right now. The Rams feel like a much more talented unit. I mean, this is clearly a team that a lot of people think is going to be a Super Bowl contender, myself included. They're definitely one of the best teams in the NFC. And if that's the case, you want to go out here, especially at home at SoFi Stadium, and try to put out a good show. I mean, there's really no prisoners in this moment. You look back to last week, the Rams didn't really feel bad about nearly putting up 40 against the New York Giants. Pulled a lot of their players in the fourth quarter with 10 minutes left, which you just don't see very often in the NFL. So I do think the Rams are going to win this game. I think should be a multiple score difference, maybe 2-3 touchdowns. We'll see ultimately how close it is. But in general, I feel like might not see Johnny Hekker out there throwing any passes. He did it last week. They kind of reserve those for really random areas and random times. But in general, I do think that the Rams are going to try to do whatever they can to really put up a big performance in this game. It's sort of a statement game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Lions, really their best opportunity to win a football game is going to come next week against Philly at home. I think this one's just going to be I just think LA is just so much better than Detroit, and Stafford's going to want to do well. And I think it's going to be a tough matchup, certainly for the Lions on Sunday. And spread what started at 13 up to 17, 16 and a half. That's not a good sign. It's tough to go cross country and win. So I'm with you on that. So great to chat with you, my friend, on the Thursday crossover.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for always listening, and make sure to enjoy this game. Tune back into the Locked On Rams and Locked On Lions podcast throughout the rest of this week. We're going to continue to update you guys with these contests. And of course, going into next week, making us your first daily listen. As always, enjoy this game.